NixOS has committed a purge of Nazi contributors and forced an abdication of the project's founder. This is a real thing that is happening. The Linux project has descended into absolute and total chaos as political activists have enforced extremist politics. This story broke at the Lunduke Journal just last evening. I'm going to read the article to you now. I have some additional information and tidbits I'd like to provide along the way, but if you'd like to read the article for free, it's up over at lunduke.locals.com. Let us begin. The NixOS project, a Linux distribution and packaging system, which has achieved significant success. It's a very cool system, by the way. NixOS and the Nix packaging, it's very, very cool. Has descended into chaos as political activists seek to implement extreme discriminatory policies and ban those who raise objections to the discrimination. As the political activists within NixOS put it, they are committing a, quote, purge of the people they call Nazis. First, a little background to set the stage for this wild tale. Let's take a step back. Let's look at the broader open source and Linux world from a 1,000-foot level here. There is a significant and easily observable pattern of extreme bullying emerging within the Linux and open source world. I use bullying because it's difficult for me to find another word that applies quite so perfectly. One where people are forced to declare allegiance to trans issues or face severe consequences. The typical pattern within any given software project or company goes something like this. Trans activists bully people into giving a disproportionately large amount of power and praise to people who identify as trans, often discriminating against non-trans people in the process. Then, if someone raises concerns regarding that discrimination, that person is called a, quote, Nazi, a white supremacist, or a transphobe. This is a pretty recurring pattern. And then that person is typically banned from the project, the community, or the company. Likewise, anyone who defends or agrees with that person is also banned. I want to make a very important note here because this is critically important. It is not necessary for a person to say anything even remotely negative about a trans person or trans people or trans issues in order to be banned and attacked by the trans activists within those open source projects. The simple act of objecting to discrimination of non-trans people is enough to provoke attacks and bullying. A few recent examples, just to say that this is not some imaginary thing, of this bullying within major Linux and open source projects. The first, OpenSUSE and SUSE declared that anyone who does not fully support trans activities and actively display the pride flag, the trans pride flag, is, quote, rotten flesh, their words, repeatedly, who should be banned from the entire Linux world. And this included a mass banning of anyone who was not excited about the idea of waving the pride flag. As another example, both Asahi Linux and Elementary OS both recently made, over the last year, a policy of not allowing any users or contributors who do not actively support trans activities. Right now, we're not talking about being okay with it. We're saying flat out they do not allow it. They say get out of their project. They don't want you anywhere near there if you don't actively support trans activities. And then, of course, there was the recent banning of the creator of Hyperland by a Red Hat employee from the free desktop project after a perceived lack of reverence for trans activities and pronouns. This is kind of an ongoing thing. It's a very, very clear pattern. Now it appears we can add NixOS to that prestigious list. So let's talk about this. The story begins, as most wild tales do, in an incredibly dull way. Back in April of this year, leadership within NixOS sought to create a new committee focused on approving monetary sponsors for Nix. I know, a committee talking about sponsorships. It's boring, right? But trust me, this gets crazy. A small group of individuals, who are best described as political activists, I don't know what else to call them, demanded that this new committee, must include dedicated seats for people who identified as gender minority. Also, this is a code for trans people, right? So they have to have dedicated seats for trans people. Now, some NixOS project contributors raised concerns about having dedicated voting seats for one specific minority group, but not for others, right? The core of those concerns seemed to be that this was effectively discrimination against some groups in order to provide a disproportionate advantage for one specific group, in this case, trans. Now, here's some screenshots. If you're listening to the podcast version, I recommend checking out the article so you get the screenshots. But here's some screenshots of all of that. I've tried to provide all of the details and the links and the resources so you could study up on this yourself. There's a huge amount of material to read if you're going to go and try and get up to date on all of this story. It's massive. It reads like a Russian novel. There's 1,001 different characters and hundreds of pages of material to get through. It's absolutely huge. But so far, this is a pretty simple story. One group wants a dedicated trans-only seat on a voting committee. Okay. And another group is concerned that this would be discriminatory. Okay. And the two disagree and discuss. Now, this is pretty straightforward and boring, right? Unfortunately, things get dark, really dark, in a hurry. Let's discuss the NixOS purge. Instead of the two sides discussing their differences and coming to some sort of agreement, the political activists, the trans-only seat group, decided to take a more intense approach. They began what they called a purge. Their words, not mine. What is needed is a purge, stated one of the NixOS leaders who advocated for the trans-only seat, referring to people who disagreed with his stance. Quote, "I don't disagree," stated another. And this desire to conduct a purge continued, with the libelous attacks on people who raised concerns ramping up rather quickly. This same NixOS leader referred to the NixOS project as a, quote, Nazi bar, referring to many of the people raising objections to the trans-only seat, reiterated the need for a purge, and finished it off with an image of the Antifa flag. This is kind of intense. Now, let's provide a little context here. So, the context of using the Antifa flag in this specific scenario. Within the United States, many local governments and organizations consider Antifa to be a violent terrorist organization. Antifa has claimed responsibility for several terrorist attacks, including riots, attempts to burn down federal government buildings, and violent assaults on journalists. Antifa has a track record of labeling any who oppose them as Nazis. This is their standard playbook. This symbol, the Antifa flag, would be used by NixOS Foundation leadership while calling for a purge, their words, of Nazis, again their words, that they disagree with is significant and worth noting. On April 21st, 2024, the purge begins. And I include here a screenshot of just a portion of the NixOS moderation log of some of the people that were banned from the NixOS project and various communication platforms as part of the purge. Over the days that followed, several contributors to NixOS were suspended from the project, including forums and other communication systems, with some individuals eventually completely banned. After an exhaustive search, and I mean exhaustive, the Lunduke Journal was unable to find a single instance where the banned and suspended individuals made any derogatory statements of any kind against trans individuals or any other group. These purged people were labeled as Nazis by some NixOS leaders, in many cases because they were not sufficiently supportive of the concept of a, quote, trans-only seat on a voting committee, among other political topics. And it didn't stop with the rank-and-file contributors to NixOS either. It went all the way to the top, with accusations being posted regarding the founder of Nix, Ilko Dolstra, prompting a response from the Nix founder. I'm going to read a little bit to you now. I must express, this is his quote, my deep disappointment and disbelief at the accusations of excluding people from minority and marginalized backgrounds, stated the Nix founder in a blog post on April 26th, a few days after the purge of Nazis began. The following day, less than 24 hours later, the Nix Foundation board members made an official post denouncing the words of the Nix founder. They basically came out and made a public statement saying they are not on board with the founder of NixOS at all, Ilko Dolstra, who just made that statement. Then, and I'm not kidding here, this seriously happened. The Nix Foundation board began drafting an abdication letter on behalf of the NixOS founder. Yeah, I've got a screenshot here of the Google document where the abdication letter was drafted. I was actually given access to this Google document, the draft of the Nix board's statement. And this is wild to me. I really want to reiterate that this is real. Ilko Dolstra, the founder of Nix, had an abdication letter written for him and was pressured into signing it. One of the drafters made a note to the Nix founder that he must add himself as a signatory of the letter, quote, and this is a direct quote, for it to appear amicable. What? The application letter was posted with the Nix founder as a signatory 2 days later on April 30th. Yeah, that really happened. And this is not finished. This tale is nowhere near done. And it is a truly crazy and insane story. Political extremists taking over a successful open source project from the inside and imposing wild, discriminatory political policies, followed by the vilification and mass purge, their words, of any who opposed their extremist politics, culminating in the seemingly forced abdication of the founder of the project itself. And perhaps even more wild is the fact that this is only a small fraction of the NixOS story, a story with a huge number of players and hundreds of pages of documents, infighting, abuse, politics, and more than a few swear words. It's crazy. What's more, the saga continues to unfold, with NixOS itself currently in a state of chaos at the hands of a small number of political activists. But the rest of this story is for another day. I had to greatly simplify this story in order to make it at all understandable. There is simply a huge amount going on within the Nix and NixOS world. A lot of contentiousness, a lot of infighting, and an almost constant day-to-day change in the total landscape of what the NixOS, the Nix project, and the Nix Foundation are even looking like. People abandoning ship with great regularity, the founder basically being forced to abdicate, with the foundation writing an abdication letter in Google Docs for him. How crazy is that? And a lot of it appears to stem from the trans activism that we talked about earlier. So many Linux and open source projects are having similar stories to this. This is one of the most wild tales that I have come across. But we've seen similar things, such as OpenSUSE, where a mass number, a huge number of contributors of the project, members of the project, were banned simply because they did not want to fly the trans pride flag themselves. It's not even a joke. These are real things that are happening. Now, what'll be interesting to see, I'm putting this particular show out, as usual, as part of the Lunduke Journal podcast. The video will go up as an official video over on the Lunduke Journal site, lunduke.locals.com. But I'm also going to publish this to YouTube. It will be interesting to see if this video is allowed to stay up at YouTube. This includes many topics and words that the Lunduke Journal has been censored for on YouTube in the past. The Lunduke Journal regularly gets suspended, gets videos taken down simply for discussing these topics. And I want to make something very clear. You will note that at no point throughout this article or this show discussing the article did the Lunduke Journal say anything disparaging of someone who might identify as trans. Not one time. This is simply talking about the specific political activists, actions that they are taking, and their words describing it. Right? I did not put the words in their mouth about Nazis and purges and flying Antifa flags. I'm simply quoting them directly, referencing their exact actions, screenshotting the logs of their actions, and presenting it to you with as much background detail as is necessary to understand the story here. Just the same, I am absolutely confident that the Lunduke Journal will once again be attacked regularly and called probably a Nazi, because that seems to be the standard modus operandi here. Because, well, that's what happens. When you talk out and speak out against, or even just simply cover these events, whether you have an opinion stated about them or not, you will be attacked as a Nazi by these political activists within so many of these Linux and open source organizations. What's really crazy to me here is that this is a pattern within so many projects, and there's more to come. Not just within Nix, but other projects as well that are experiencing similar, not the same, but very similar issues at the hands of some of the exact same political activists that we're seeing in action here. And I don't think that's going to stop. And in part because nobody is standing up within the open source and Linux world and saying that this sort of bigotry and awfulness, mass purges, vilifying people that you just simply might not agree 100% with on a political topic as Nazis. Oh my word. This sort of thing should not be acceptable within any part of the computer industry, and yet it is. It is allowed. And no other tech news outlet is covering these topics. Not one. You won't see this on the Register, on ZDNet, on Wired, on Verge, on Ars, on Gizmodo, on any of them. None of them will cover it. None of the Linux blogs, the Linux podcasts, they won't cover it. Even the people who want to cover it are afraid to cover it because they know the moment they do that the same group of political activists that have taken down and caused NixOS to go into absolute chaos, that have caused massive amounts of damage to other Linux and open source projects will start to come after them. That any podcast, any journalist who even simply covers this, simply quotes what these activists say, those journalists, those podcasters will be called Nazis, will be attacked, will be vilified, will be censored in whatever way they can. It will happen. I'm lucky. I'm lucky in that I'm a little bit hard to fully censor because I am funded entirely by subscribers. I don't take any ad dollars. Big tech does not give me any money. None of these organizations provide me any funding. It's all people like you. All people like you who actually want to know what is really happening within the tech, the Linux, the open source world, not just the strange, highly scrubbed, sanitized version of events that you get from the other tech news outlets. This story will not be covered by anyone else. Watch. And if it does get covered, if by some miracle, and I would love to see a miracle happen, this does get covered by other outlets, it will be extremely watered down. Significant parts of the story will be left out. and I will either not be mentioned or vilified in the process. One of the two. Guaranteed, because that's a pattern, it's observable, and it keeps on going. And thank you to everyone who supports the Lunduke Journal, who makes all of this possible. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.